I think, who am I here to convince? What's the focus of my arguments? Because I generally claim to be here for conversation and to be informed as much as to inform other people. But people accuse you of, well, you make all these arguments and you're trying to tell people what you think is true. You're informing them of your opinion, and your opinion has some meaning, at least to you, right? Meaning me. And that's all true. So I do think about it and I think, well, what am I trying what am I trying to inform people about? And the thing is, I think who I'm primarily talking to is other skeptics. I'm not so much about convincing people of skepticism. It's more like if you have come to believe some form of skepticism, I want to point out how to make it all consistent. So what I mean, for example, let's say you're a relativist back in the 1800s. You had no idea time was relative. You might have believed in Galilean relativity, velocity was relative. And the fact of the matter is, you can derive general relativity from the fact that velocity is relative. It all comes from the fact that if velocity is relative, you shouldn't be able to tell your velocity from measuring your velocity relative to the speed of light. And it turns out that's true, and it's relative, and to make it all work out, time has to be relative, and they checked, and it is. So you had something to learn, is my point. The part of relativity you believed had ramifications you hadn't even considered. And that's what's going on with skepticism. Skepticism, the base level of skepticism, the sort of humility about knowledge and that you never know 100%, that's pervasive, that's ubiquitous, it's everywhere. But what you don't have is people really understanding the ramifications. Okay, and I've talked about the ramifications in skepticism, and that's a lot of epistemology, but I can also use a metaphor from another area. It's like materialism. So many people are materialists. They believe the world's made of material things, and it's mechanical in some sense. I hate to use the word mechanical because that's somewhat limited, but it's energy interchanging and whatnot, and what you would call mechanical. And yet they think things like, oh, ideas are immaterial. They got everything being material, and then except for ideas. I mean, I the ramifications. So those are the kinds of things I try to talk about. Materialism is an example too, and I think it's closely related to skepticism. At least in my case, it is closely related. But anyway, on skepticism, you know, it's if you have a skeptical epistemology, how does the world work out? How do you believe? What's the meaning of knowledge? All these things. It's for skeptics. It's like you accept skepticism, but I'm afraid so many people accept skepticism and say, oh, I'm some sort of a nihilist. I don't believe in anything, see? Or I'm a nihilist and I can therefore believe anything I want, so I'm going to believe in some fairy tale. You know, and that's not productive. That's not helping anybody. So you have to conceive of your philosophy and then draw all of its logical conclusions. And I look out there, so many people have not drawn the logical conclusions of skepticism, which is fine. But, if I have something to inform people of, that's it, because I've drawn a lot of conclusions from skepticism, and so far they really never go wrong. When they do go wrong, when they don't compare well to reality, they can be adjusted in something, happens like time gets more relative, and relativity is confirmed beyond the wildest imaginings. And it happens with skepticism, and skepticism is confirmed. Yeah, we can have knowledge, but it's not absolute. All these ramifications, the results are very interesting and subtle in some cases. So that's who I'm talking to, is other skeptics. To say, listen, if you're skeptical about your knowledge, then there's certain ramifications. Okay, certain ways you have to define things. And that's the relationship to materialism. Because if you're a skeptic, then there's a relationship to natural philosophy. So you're a skeptic. You go by empirical evidence. What is empirical evidence? Well, that's what we call nature, the information we get from the real world. Okay, so you believe in nature, you go by the evidence. Therefore, you are skeptical, and You're going to have to define materialism in terms of evidence, which means in terms of senses, which means that if you're dreaming, it won't matter in that sense because material is whatever is the substance of the experiences, even if it's a dream experience. And so you have a kind of materialism that's related to your base epistemology, and therefore everything is material. Ideas are material because they're going on in the brain, and so on and so forth. And why do we say that? Well, because we perceive it that way. The perceptions show us that they're going on in this mechanical thing, the brain. And, maybe the perception is dream, whatever, again, whatever. The substance associated with our perceptions, it's just a concept. There might not even be a substance associated with our perceptions, except for this abstract idea, because that's fine. Substance is an abstract idea. We get perceptions. We make a model of what those perceptions mean, and the substance is this thing in our mind that we create to represent what we think is causing our perceptions. And as long as we create a coherent model, it all tends to work out. And these intertwining relationships between these way you have to think about life is what I'm trying to describe. And most people are skeptics or, believe in some kind of skepticism. Use another metaphor, it's like Ptolemy's system, he believed in a geocentric solar system. But the elements of a heliocentric solar system were in his system. Why? Because his system was very empirical and it was trying to predict where planets would be in the sky. Very empirical, and it was related to the data. And so even though he wouldn't admit that there was a heliocentric solar system, the fact that there were these epicycles, that's the remnants, that's the evidence. If somebody keeps looking into the empirical data, eventually they figure out, hey, those epicycles are not epicycles. Those are evidence that it's really a heliocentric solar system. And so you know, in skepticism, we have the same kind of thing. You might readjust uh, parameters as you go and continue to find out what the ramifications of your ideas are. And so, if there's a mission to this channel, I guess that would be the mission because, I want people to sort of complete their skepticism, because a lot of people have the elements of skepticism. They have the epicycles in a dogmatic system. They believe in certain knowledge. They believe things are true or false and there's no in between, or whatever they believe, or they believe there's a priori truths, whatever. In addition, there are epicycles so that their system matches reality. And if you look at the world skeptically, you see that those epicycles are to compensate for the errors inherent in having a system that doesn't just admit that it's skeptical. It doesn't admit that it's heliocentric. It says, no, I'm geocentric, but I want to express reality, so I'll make all these adjustments. I'll believe in certain knowledge and absolute truth, but I'll say there's exceptions to the rule. It's like, I'll say everything. There's things that don't rely on context, but they're not true in some contexts. And we make these exceptions and these kludges to our system because uh, we're putting epicycles in there to compensate. And ultimately, if you look at it, all knowledge systems, I think, can be explained using a skeptical basis. They could all be put in terms of the skeptical way of looking at thinking about life and philosophy. So, cheers.